This Victorian railway station building was built around 1880. It sits on the outskirts of Sydney. And we're looking straight onto the end of one of the platform buildings. Now I'm using a 0.2 millimeter Copic multiliner here, and I use this for the whole drawing except for the clumping plants that are closest to us, and I use a 0.3 for that. Now, we're not looking straight on, we're slightly to one side. If you look at those three windows, you'll notice that the one on the left is thinner than the one on the right. If you just look at the darkness of the glass, that becomes more obvious. And that tells us that we're not straight on, because if that were the case, they would be the same. And we can also see that we're slightly off centre at the roof line with the gable ends, that the one on the left slopes inward, but the one on the right doesn't slope inward at the same angle, which it would if we were straight on, but it's far more vertical. So we're slightly to the right-hand side of centre in this. I start though with that centre window because, as you may have heard me say before, it's the easiest shape in the whole drawing to get the proportions correct, and because I am trying to draw it the same size, to be able to check most easily with the reference. I haven't drawn the lines straight across the bottom for the centre or the right-hand window because some of the plants come up and cross visually the bottom of those windows. Now, it would have been easy to say, oh look, I'll just do the windows and stop the foliage before it gets there. But while that's easy to do, if it's a habit we get into, we can find that we end up removing all the little interesting things about the scene, and we end up making it look more generic. So it's the sort of thing I think it's good to resist doing. So having got that bay window now as a reference point for proportions, I now work on extending. I put a dot where I think the top of this gable end is going to be, and that lets me check the angle that height creates with where the gable's going to join what I've already done. And then I could check the angle using that dot to see if it's looking right. And I was happy with that. Now, with this window, this is a sort of detail that I think it's really important to work hard at getting the proportions correct. And the way I like to do it is to establish the top and bottom of the window. And that means now I'm not going to draw it too long, and it's easier to get the right width, because it really visually changes the way it looks if we make a big mistake with that. But now I do make a big mistake. See if you can see what I do wrong here. Can you see my mistake? I've put a straight line across where I want to put the chimneys. And my first reaction was, oh no, I'm going to have to start again. But then I thought, I'm often saying in my videos that mistakes are never look as bad as they do when we've just made them. And we should persevere with our drawing most of the time, because we can usually either hide the mistake or make it less obvious. And we that way also learn that mistakes aren't to be feared so much, because they're not as bad by the end of the drawing most of the time. So have a look at the end of the drawing and see whether you think the effect of that line that is running through the chimneys is so bad that I should have started again, or whether it's quite acceptable for the overall impact. Because not just are there a few tricks I can do up on the roof line, but with simply more lines across and more values across the whole scene, there's more to look at, which means any one part is less obvious. So I decide that I'll add value for the colour of the slate roof. I wasn't going to do this. This is one of my ways I'm hoping to disguise that line, by simply doing dark value in the correct place that will make the chimney stand out more and give the effect that I want. This is a great little trick to use with hatching. And one helpful thing is to do our hatching from both directions. What often happens, and happens for me, is that the side I start the hatching line, because I have to position the pen in the right place, the tip ends up staying on the paper for just slightly longer than at the other end, and the first part of the line is slightly slower. Well, that means more ink flows, which creates a darker effect on the side that I start. So when we go in both directions, we can make that play the other way. And you can see what I'm doing here and evening up that darker left-hand side now with the right-hand side to get a more even effect across the whole thing. Well, what do you think? Do you feel that those chimneys are looking less obviously a mistake? So I've now switched to my 0.3 millimeter pen, and I'm doing these clumping plants. Now, when I looked at the plants, I thought there were three distinct depths of plane moving backwards from the closest ones that are larger, but also darker. They're not in the direct sun. And then there's another large group behind that really is what we see at the left-hand side of the bay window, but then it comes down horizontally down to the ground at a 45-degree angle. And then under the window, visually under the window on the right-hand side, we have a further back clump again. So I'm wanting to use these to give me some differentiation between the depths of plane and therefore what we're looking at, and therefore visually something to try and create that stops this being an absolute tangle of lines. Clumping plants are not particularly easy. I think, and I probably should have spent a little more time on these, I probably didn't work the values in the very front part dark enough. But as I said, it was the end of the day, and I'm wanting to still post this tonight. And so, trying to vary now with these further leaves, my line, make them lighter and closer together than the ones I've used down the front. But I also want to create some values. I want to create a few layers of light and dark, approximate layers as we move back to help the eye separate the depths of plane of these strappy-leafed clumping plants. If you look at the very first ones I did, if we want to have some of these leaves bending forward in front of the others and curving over or bent over at a point, we need to draw those first before we do all the more upright or 45-degree ones, because they have to sit behind those marks. So this is where a little bit of strategizing always helps. But now that I've established where these plants come up to in terms of the glass, I can bring the hatching down to make them darker. This darkness is a really important part of visually this scene, and so I want to get it dark enough but not too pitch black. I want it to be darker than the roof colour. And just trying to correct some of these angles that are a little bit too angled at the top of the bay window. Oops, sorry about that. I stopped the video and then didn't turn it back on when I started for about 6 minutes, but fortunately I noticed. So I was just doing those trees to the left-hand side. Flowering jacaranda tree, a South American tree that does very well in Sydney and is hugely planted as a street planting and front yard tree. Very spectacular South American tree. A lot of Australians actually think it's a native plant, but we got it from South America. And just establishing where this fence is going to go. With this fence, this is a good example of drawing the effect of the detail, not the detail. Being so foreshortened, we're seeing so much edge on, very visually compressed, very visually narrowed, and so it's simply impossible to draw the detail. So I need to suggest the detail so you can see whether you think I do that successfully. And now we have the awning over the railway platform. I had originally thought that I was going to do some marks to suggest the very scale-wise small bricks scale at this distance. But by this stage, I began to think, well, there are lots of lines all over this with the foliage, with the hatching for value on the roof. And so I thought, well, when we actually look at the reference, although we can see the bricks, overall it is a fairly plain effect in reference to the other marks. So I thought if I put the brickwork in, it would only pull away from the lovely simplicity. I think Victorian architecture on this scale has a very elegant simplicity of proportion and detail that I really, really enjoy. So I decided to leave the walls looking plain and one value and not to disfigure that with trying to draw bricks. So a few more adjustment lines, correcting values, working out where I need a little more emphasis just to show something more clearly, do the shadows on the bay window. You'll find this reference photo, of course, on my channel community page, so why not have a go drawing it yourself? It's a nice little subject if you want to practice freehand in ink drawing with proportion, and then you have those wonderful clumping plants down the front. I do have several videos on drawing those sorts of clumping plants or clumping grasses. You'll find them on my tree drawing video. So I think they're common enough, particularly if you like drawing buildings and streetscapes, that it's worth just spending a little time so that they don't become a weakness in an otherwise nicely managed drawing. So just a bit of back and forth, making these adjustments, and then I think I'm done. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Please hit the like button if you enjoyed this, and why not have a go drawing it yourself. But look, in the end, whatever you draw, however you draw it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.